We launched that product in 2014 and sold it in 2020 for $18 billion. But sitting there, I look at India and say, wow, India's got the opportunity to leapfrog. If you look at what happened with Jio, all the financial services platforms that have been created, I would say India does need to lean into AI more. I invested for the first time in Stripe in 2010. We've invested 14 times since then.
It seems like, you're trying to build a different type of organization, which is going a lot beyond the standard venture playbook.
Venture has a little bit of that dynamic too. Because it's been so successful, why change it?
Very rarely founders say, I'm going to build this for next 30 years. It's very difficult to think even 5 years ahead. US, 15 years ago, till now, I think it seems like no one is happy with the US healthcare system.
It's actually my biggest worry in life is working on the wrong problems. One thing I really admire about the Indian business ecosystem is that the biggest companies are just as entrepreneurial as the small ones.
Hemant, welcome to SparX. I want to start with the GC's focus on India. I think last few years I've noticed that GC is getting a lot more involved in India. You guys merged with Venture Highway. You started GC Institute in India. You are very proactive in kind of establishing this India-US corridor and a lot of collaboration among Indian entrepreneurs, business people and policy people with US. What's your take on India? What's prompting you to commit so much time and effort, and your own plans about India in the coming years?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me. Look, I would say a lot of the focus on India comes from two things. One is it's personal. I grew up here, want to make a difference here, and obviously so does Neeraj and other members of our team. But I think the other, from a business standpoint, it comes down to our thesis around global resilience. So, having the world having gone through all the polarization in technology, and then you think about COVID and energy crises and the wars, every country is thinking about the resiliency around their core industries. Those core industries for us are healthcare, defense, energy, industrials, and financial services. And so in the context of that, India as a growth market is a very interesting one for us to focus on. I think the other thing is, as you think about the continued decoupling that's happening and the bipolarity back in the world with the US and the Chinese market, India's got a really interesting, unique place to be. It's going to collaborate on many dimensions. It's going to collaborate on defense with, both dimensions. It's going to do trade with both US and China. But when it comes to technology, it's pretty apparent to us that the US-India corridor is going to be a strategic one. So a lot of our focus has been on how do we make sure we help shape that innovation cycle and do it in a way that it's actually enduring. Not like what happened with US and China, but something that actually does create economic benefit to both nations for the long term.
Absolutely. There's obviously a lot of excitement about India's potential. GDP growth continues to be very robust in the 6 to 7% range. But if you compare India with US or Silicon Valley, Silicon Valley has been powered with this relentless technological innovation every decade, something, transforming, and we are living through. And the newer one, powered by LLMs and AI, and we'll talk about that later. Are there few things in India that you think we need to get to next level, need to unlock over next 5 to 10 years, whether, ease of doing business, technological innovation, or something else, what will truly unleash? We are at a cusp of lot of promise, but it needs to play out, and there are probably some bottlenecks as well. From your perspective, what are some of the things we should pay attention to make sure that we are going from strength to strength and not get trapped somewhere, in the journey?
Yeah, look, Silicon Valley has been a very interesting place in terms of all the innovation in the different sectors. But sitting there, I look at India and say, wow, India's got the opportunity to leapfrog. If you look at what happened with Jio, all the financial services platforms that have been created, India's actually, far ahead and doing things in ways that sort of draw on the learnings from the US as well. So a lot of what I feel like we bring when we come here is what not to do.
Right.
Look at the US healthcare system, all the payer-provider misalignment. India's about to go down that path. What should it really look like? So from my standpoint, I don't think it's how do you go from strength to strength by investing in certain things? It naturally is happening. I would say India does need to lean into AI more. The applied AI thesis can be transformative for India. And I think the advanced manufacturing sector is sort of naturally happening here as the world decouples from China in that. As long as those two areas India builds real capability in and continues to improve its infrastructure. So there's ease of doing business here. I think it's going to be very well positioned to build global companies.
Right. And as part of GC Institute, is the intention is to actively collaborate with policymakers in this dialogue and, kind of together figure out, what some of those areas could be and how we can, just make sure we are improving things from here on.
We describe General Catalyst as a global investment and transformation company. And the whole idea is we back the world's most ambitious entrepreneurs, help them create enduring companies, and then take ecosystems of these enduring companies to transform industries. Transformation requires technology, policy, and capital.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to transform industries no matter where in the world. We need to have a real muscle, ourselves and our entrepreneurs, in working with the governments.
Yeah.
Building trust, building sort of policy design, that accelerates innovation, but also minimizes unintended consequences.
Right.
To that end, we launched the General Catalyst Institute to be sort of a steward of innovation and the role of innovation in society.
Yeah.
What should a healthcare system look like no matter where in the world? And then work with local governments on, given the current state, what policy vectors can actually help you get to that end state. Yeah. And so we're building that real capability, for our founders here, Europe, the US, as well as our own team in all these areas where we do business.
And this is, super interesting. If you look at typical venture firm, Hemant, venture business, I feel in many ways has been same, throughout, that you bet on emerging market trends, you bet on, strong founders and hope for the best. And if you have a good judgment about people, things happen. But it seems, and I was reading a lot about General Catalyst and the things, you guys are, recently, as well as, over last, decade or so, it seems like, you're trying to build a different type of organization, which is going a lot beyond the standard venture playbook and getting involved as in policy, transformation, thinking about societal impact very deeply, and very strong pedigree of encouraging entrepreneurship and co-building companies within the firm, including you've co-founded Livongo way back, which has become a humongous company, and, we'll talk about healthcare also later. But just what's your vision for General Catalyst and also the need for evolving as a firm to a different kind of organization?
Yeah, look, I've been in the venture business for over 20 years. When I got in the business, the mindset very much was ventures about serendipity. You're trying to find really great entrepreneurs. You want to convince them to do business with you, and then hope for the best. Right. That they are one of those companies on the power law that drives, a terrific outcome for your funds. And the goal has been to exit, when companies reach a certain scale. So I think that's what the business was. But if you think about what happened post 2007, this is what I wrote about in my first book, Unscaled, with AWS, iPhone, Facebook Connect, you started creating a digital society, and we started rethinking all these sort of core societal systems with technology, with sort of digital first. And so the remit for the founders changed from just building software companies for efficiency to rethinking societal systems. Yeah. Well, if you're going to do that, that is a much longer duration problem. That is a much bigger problem. It's a problem that requires much more attention to responsibility. Yeah. And so how could it be that our product, the venture capital fund, is sufficient to serve those founders that are trying to do that in this next phase? How could it be? Yeah. And so we went down this path saying, if we truly want to create the greatest change with technology, we have to, first of all, change ourselves in our own orientation. And we've done a lot of work around that. The people at the firm, our investment philosophy. Then we have to think about, how does our industry change? What products do we have to serve the founders, who ultimately are the agents of change that drive all this? And then we have to think about, if we have those founders, we have that capital innovations, how do we go about actually driving those transformations in the world?
Got it. And the part of that, does it require also as a firm to, and I guess you're almost implying, to look much longer term? One of the things in my entrepreneurial journey I have noticed, Hemant, is for some reason, and early on in my entrepreneurial career, I was used to thinking exit time horizon 6 to 8 years, which, later on you realize, because most funds are structured as, 10-year life cycle and so on. But if you zoom out and look at the enduring companies which are able to bring about societal change, they take many decades. Bezos, 2 decades down the line, I'm still talking about day one, and Amazon still continue to do great things. And so it's, 2 most valuable company, outside of NVIDIA are 50-year-old companies, Microsoft and Apple are still doing, the cutting edge of driving a lot of innovation. So does it have implications for how capital is raised, structured, deployed, and perhaps, founder mindset? Very rarely founder says, I'm going to build this for next 30 years. It's very difficult to think even 5 years ahead. So how does, when you talk about societal impact and these transformative changes, how does the whole ecosystem need to evolve to be able to support these kind of,
Look, it's a great question. So, I invested for the first time in Stripe in 2010. We've invested 14 times since then, including, lighting a very large check in the round that they raised last year at $50 billion. Why? Because we think this investment from a return perspective and its ability to compound it just as exciting today as it was, 14 years ago. And so it comes down to the fact that John and Patrick are the types of founders that think of this as their life's work. They're going to do this forever. Yeah. So in some ways, we are searching for founders that think that way. By contrast, when we founded Livongo, you mentioned earlier, we launched that product in 2014 and sold it in 2020 for $18 billion. Okay? It unleashed a whole different paradigm for digital health innovation. Yeah. So in some ways, we did a lot of good. But I'll tell you, the day Glenn and I sold the business, we were like, well, now what? We had built this incredible channel supporting Fortune 500 and their employees on chronic management, and now we don't have it anymore. And we only served 500,000 people at that time. So out of 35 in the US and hundreds of millions worldwide. So what did we really do? That had a real impact on me, sort of thinking through, well, we have to change. Because we can have much greater impact, and coupled with that is that we can have much greater return for our investors. Like, we're a high-performance firm. Everything we do is performance first. But I actually think performance gets significantly enhanced if you think about impact in the long term and build towards it.
Right. Do you think you are in some ways in minority in terms of, as the venture ecosystem is concerned, or these questions are being debated in the venture industry as a whole as well? What is the future of this? Venture industry has a great run over the last 50 years. It's been outstanding, a value creation point of view. But you think the industry overall is also thinking, what do we do now with the pace of, technological acceleration continue to increase? The world is becoming more polarized. There's a lot of things. The world is different today. What does it mean for the industry?
There's this old adage that nothing feels like success. Right. And, venture has a little bit of that dynamic to it. It's been so successful. Why change it? Our LPs give the same advice, saying don't do too many things, stay early stage or stay at the stage that you're focused on. And the innovation generally ends up being, when bubbles happen, people raise bigger funds. They innovate on, we have a stage, sector, or geography fund, and so you raise more capital. When bubbles collapse, they raise smaller funds. So it's this accordion with sort of fund sizes of equity. And it's never been, let's take a step back and think about what do the founders need to have the greatest impact and therefore create the greatest return for us. Once you unlock that mindset, you start thinking, well, we have to change quite a bit. I think there are a few firms that are taking a shot at that. And I think what you're seeing in the industry obviously is there's a lot of it's sort of getting bifurcated into very early stage, sort of specialists in helping founders navigate ambiguity in the beginning, and then platforms that are sort of saying, we have many solutions for you, come engage with us. And I think we're one of the ones that are starting to innovate, but we're not the only one. I do think there are a few others doing the same thing.
Got it. Hemant, I want to go back to, you mentioned the books. And first of all, I was surprised to discover you've written 3 books and looks like 4th is on the way. And as I was, preparing for this episode, I went through the summary of all the 3 books, very detailed summary here. And I realized that, starting your first book, Unscaled, way back in 2018, you wrote a whole book, focusing on the likely impact of AI and how people should prepare. Now, AI was, got on most people's radar in 2022 with GPT. This was 4 years before. While, Google, Facebook, some companies might be using AI at that time for some basic optimization, recommendation, and so on. How did you arrive at that point where you felt like AI is, upon us, is going to play such a meaningful role, and writing a whole book, which is very prescient. Look back, pretty much all the thing is playing out as we speak. So what was your mindset, 2016, 17 as you're thinking about AI?
Yeah, it's sort of interesting. When I moved to the Valley in 2011, I made the observation that the role of technology was changing from providing software efficiency to rethinking markets, rethinking what healthcare should look like, rethinking what education should like, financial services, insurance, all the core sort of industries. So the efficacy of those industries were changing. And the core belief there was going from the 20th century belief of mass production economies of scale to the 21st century advantage around mass personalization, which was driven by data and cloud and the fact that we were connected to all these human beings and knew their preferences, and we could really, leverage personalization. That was the rudimentary word that eventually unlocked the data and then made the transformers happen and GPT happen, right? So it's a continuum in some ways. And so I made that observation and said, well, the world's going to go down the mass personalization path. It has severe implications. And let's be thoughtful about how we go transform these industries with that. And I think, ended up giving us a prepared mind for the way we've been investing over the last, I started writing that book in 2015. So it's been about a decade since I started thinking about that. And I think, we're going to look back and say from 2007, the singularity around starting to create a digital society, it's going to get looked at as like a 30-year cycle. We created the DoorDashes and the Ubers and the Airbnbs in the first cycle, and now we're starting to think about all these new incredible companies like the ChatGPTs and the transformation of all the different industries in this next 15 years. I mean, I feel very lucky. We're going to look back and say we happened to do this job in the golden era of innovation and entrepreneurship, all triggered by this sort of secular trend around data and AI.
And this, golden era of innovation also brings, with a lot of hype along with this. Before GPT, not many people outside of Valley paying attention to AI, and now everyone is paying attention to AI. Last 2 years, hundreds of billions of dollars have gone into, if you look at all the money that big tech is putting in. But technology still, while there is exponential growth, but still takes time to go through iterations and figure out what's working, what's not working. The LLMs themselves are evolving. No one really knows whether they will reach a plateau or we need, more architectural breakthrough to get to next level. Then there is applied AI that you mentioned earlier, where people are figuring out it's shifting sand, a situation. You're trying to build something in applied AI, but the foundational technology itself is changing. How should one navigate next few years? Because this, we've all seen this hype cycle play out way too many times, where the kernel of the truth is there that long term, whether it's internet or mobile phone or social media, all plays out, but it does not go in straight line. It typically tends to go in this line. As you look ahead, and I know GC has obviously taken a lot of big bets in AI. What will you recommend? And just your mental model of navigating next few years, as far as AI revolution is concerned.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think I would say when I think about the AI machinery as to like what's really happening, from our standpoint, there is all the foundational model infrastructure that's getting created. Every time one of these big tech companies or OpenAI or Anthropic do another multi-billion-dollar run, they get a little bit better. Will it tap out? I happen to believe the scaling laws will matter, and it probably will tap out at some point and we'll need new architectures. But every time they do a new run, they're getting better and unlocking more of the art of the possible on which applications that they apply their AI are not possible. So I think that's the foundational layer. Then on top of that, there's a lot getting done, and we're building a lot of this ourselves as well. Language models that create sort of adaptation of these models to different industries. So we've done it in healthcare, we've done it in media, industrials, sort of across a bunch of these, biology. And then the point is, well, you have these sort of language models that are specific to these industries. How do you bring them about to do the transformation of the enterprise? You need to modify the data infrastructure so you can actually adopt AI. There's a lot of work, and I know you're obviously thinking a lot about that. You need to then think about, well, if you introduce a agentic workforce that sits next to the human workforce, how's that organization really going to function? What is the culture going to look like? And then all the change management around that. So when I look at the entire AI sort of body of work, it's that continuum. Starts with the foundation model infrastructure to actually having an AI-enabled enterprise where agentic and human workforces kind of coexist with this sort of transformation. And lots of choices there. And how do you bring it in? Which places should AI be the pilot and give it a lot of agency versus co-pilot and really be sort of a decision support tool for the humans based on the severity of the situation, all of that. That's what's happening. So from our standpoint, sort of being intentional about which industries you're tackling, how they ought to evolve, how much agency AI should have based on the severity of the decision. So like in healthcare, you should processing payments, revenue cycle management, automate it, give AI all the agency. But if you're making clinical decisions, enable the physicians to make those and give them efficiency. So I think those kinds of choices we're making. And I'll tell you, I'm very bullish on the application of AI in society. So in healthcare in the US, we have been rolling out both scribe tools and revenue cycle management and sort of all the operational AI work at scale in major institutions, major health systems, and sort of agentic nurses, if you will, or sort of, an AI workforce that's on the phone, following up with your patients, getting them ready for the next procedures in a very empathetic way. And those are working beautifully. And you're going to see that be at scale sooner than you think. So and we're applying that to other industries, legal, accounting, all the business functions. So there's a lot of transformation of the enterprise that is going to happen in the next few years.
Got it. And do you see like most of the AI in the near future is mostly going to be you leverage LLM, whether one of the foundational models or custom built for industry or even a small language model, or the traditional, custom training neural network still has role to play for a specific application, that's past.
So let me illustrate this with an example. So the agentic nurse product that I mentioned was created by this company, Hippocratic AI. It's a company we helped incubate last year. We got 40 health systems to give us their data. And we basically trained it with the health systems, and now it's becoming sort of effectively a augmentation to a nurse on the phone in a fully automated way.
Yeah.
That product on the bottom uses foundation models, but they're able to swap models in as one model gets better versus the other. They're able to sort of have infrastructure that can swap that in and out. And then there are 24 models on top. Some of them are the traditional models. Some of them are implementations on top of the foundation models.
Got it.
So I think these systems, and that to me is the new application, are going to use different sets of tools. And a lot of the stuff that we used to talk about as traditional machine learning and AI is still going to be used, because some places you want to be deterministic in your outcomes as well. And as we know, language models don't really behave that way. So I think these are going to be complex concatenation of different models as we think about turning them into solutions.
Right. And I think it'll be great to see AI play a meaningful role in healthcare, especially in US, because that's been even when I used to stay in US, 15 years ago, till now, I think seems like no one is happy with the US healthcare system. And I know you have thought about that a lot, founding of Livongo, your second book on healthcare, again, a lot of thoughts about both and what is possibly wrong and what are the possible solutions going forward. Do you think we're finally at a point where there is a much brighter future of healthcare in US? And I also want to maybe second part of my question will be the leapfrogging opportunities for India, because we don't have too much baggage as far as healthcare is concerned. We have different problem of access, inequality. Some people have access to outstanding healthcare, most people have access to no healthcare. So what does AI possibly means for healthcare in the coming decade, both in US and possibly for opportunities in India?
Yeah. So look, I've been working in the healthcare space. I started my first incubation in 2005. So it's coming up in 20 years. Right. And I think it's going to take another 20, but I'm extremely bullish that we will make a dent in this transformation. So let's start with the problem. The problem is who pays, who benefits, who decides are different stakeholders. So you just don't have a rational economic system in healthcare. And the question is, how do you transform that?
Yeah.
And our belief has been that it needs a few things. One is you need to focus back on the consumer and what's best for them. What does the consumer care about? You want a proactive, affordable, accessible healthcare.
Yeah.
So unhealthcare is about actually really laying out a vision for health assurance, where it says, how do you pivot the system to keeping people healthy and making sure the economics are in favor of driving that behavior versus sick care?
Yeah.
Second thing is, in order to make this work, the institutions that need to become better businesses are actually health systems. That's the contrarian belief that I operated with, which was most of the industry would say a lot of health systems won't be around. They're not, they're not the right businesses. And our view has been, well, that's the product. I mean, it's the care that you deliver. We have to make them be better businesses. We have to transform them in technology, transform them from a workforce standpoint, and think about new ways to serve the consumer so that it's economically viable. And the third thing is to do that. That's a very broad remit. the Amazon of healthcare that solves this problem is not $1 trillion company, it's $1 trillion ecosystem. So you need a set of companies that are kind of decomposing this problem into smaller pieces. And then you need to have a mindset of radical collaboration with the health systems, because you can't do it alone. So the journey we've been on has been, we've partnered with 20 or so health systems now. It's about almost 15% of the US healthcare system. We're in their C-suites working on, what does this transformation need to look like? How do you use AI? How do you think about workforce? How do you think about remote ways of serving the consumers? How do you transition to value-based care? All these questions, we are investing in and or building companies and then working with these systems to say, let's bring you best-of-breed solutions and help execute that strategy for you.
God.
That's the journey we're on. We also recently announced we're actually acquiring a health system. It's in Akron, Ohio, is pending Attorney General approval there. And our belief is that if we have, and it's a integrated delivery network, so it's got, inpatient, outpatient, it's got its own insurance plan, that if we can, it's a microcosm of what most of America looks like. If we can actually bring our capabilities, have a bit more agency, work with that team and demonstrate the model, that'll become a blueprint for how everybody in the US and hopefully worldwide will want to think about healthcare.
Right.
Now, India does have an opportunity to leapfrog. I think India should move towards the idea of health assurance versus health insurance from the beginning, and sort of, creates incentive structures and payment structures which activate services towards keeping people proactively healthy. I think it's going to be very easy to slide into what happened in the US, and there's an opportunity to leapfrog there. And a lot of the work we're doing here is to think about that in the way the healthcare infrastructure gets created here. So we're investors in Loop and Orange and others here, and doing it some other very innovative things that will hopefully announce soon as well, that are moving towards that vision of delivering a health assurance mindset from the beginning as the healthcare system here institutionalizes to the next level.
No, this is, I think, pretty strong encouragement. It's also something, pretty close to my heart as well, Hemant. So in 2016, when I started CureFit, the idea was to build this integrated health platform, which is primarily proactive health, trying to keep you healthy and marrying you with primary care. The way our journey...
I know, we talked back then, I remember,
Right, but the way our journey unfolded, we ended up doing outstanding job in fitness, but not so much in the other aspects of it. But I guess you're saying is, given that, what AI can do now is probably a fresh opportunity for newer entrepreneurs to really think big and bold and try to do something interesting in India.
Absolutely. I think you have a lot more tools available to you now, and I'm a big believer that the system, it's well positioned to transform itself now.
Right. Maybe just going back to AI for a second. AI seems like it's on the most part it's a big bucks game. Today the cost of building anything deep in AI is humongous. The training costs are very high, GPU costs are high. You also need a top 0.01 percentile talent, because a lot of people can write API on top of foundational models and build something, but there is defensibility is not there. It just someone else can also call same API and get the same output done. What is your advice to entrepreneurs who are trying to build something in AI but may not have access to that kind of capital or that kind of talent, but a lot of world's problems need to be solved by AI? So how should these entrepreneurs navigate this little bit of a this barrier that is accessible only to few, and most people are just consumers of foundational models?
Yeah, look, I think the development of the foundation models, that game is big cap. I actually wouldn't advise most founders to go take a shot at that, because you need capital, you need proprietary access to infrastructure. It's just, I think it's getting consolidated into a handful of players with very, very deep pockets. To me, but there's so much value to be created on top with with the applied AI layer. I think there is a great opportunity. I do think the AI talent will democratize. There is a lot of training available. I think the IT services industry is going to morph and become sort of an AI enabled industry. So I do think that's going to create more supply of talent and access to resources. But there's no way to short circuit the fact that if you're going to build a applied AI company, you need to be able to attract the applied AI talent. In India, there's so much talent in software that I would just actively think about how do you train them to get into these roles, and the applied AI engineer that's a 10x engineer might look different from a traditional 10x software engineer because it's so much more about systems thinking and creativity versus being able to churn out complex code fast because machines now do that for you.
Right.
So I do think you have to rethink what kind of talent can be great at innovating in AI as well.
Yeah. And since, kind of mentioned the service industry in India, Hemant, so there are three components of whole service industry. There is a whole, call center BPO industry. This is back office, and nearly every large global 2000 company has a back office in India now, and more are being built. Very human intensive today. And then, of course, IT services where a lot of software is being written. It's a $250 billion export. It's a big source of foreign income for the country, and has done well. I think everyone is rightfully very proud of it. But there are headwinds on the horizon for the whole service industry, and a different kind of opportunities as well. And this looks like this one sector which will go through sea change. So what are probably some of the things to keep in mind for both, probably existing players as well as entrepreneurs who want to build something new here?
Yeah, this is actually one of the first places for applied AI. So if you think about over the last 40 years, all the globalization that happened because of labor arbitrage that applies to IT services, that applies to call centers, legal services, all that offshoring because of labor is getting onshored with AI productivity. That, to me, market forces are going to make that happen. So I think the question is, on the other side of that transformation, what happens to these markets, India, Philippines, others that created these industries? These companies have to transform, or new companies have to come and be enablers of AI-first services. And by the way, those are going to be great and large opportunities, because if you create an agentic workforce, then all the software those humans use today will also become part of the features. So in some ways, the TAM is actually very large in terms of what you can capture that way. So it's very exciting, but you have to see the entrepreneurs shift their mindset to saying we have to really self-disrupt or come, build next category of companies that are AI first, replacements of these businesses. And that's an area we've spending a lot of time thinking through. How do we manifest that into next generation category defining companies?
Yeah. As part of your all three books, Hemant, you have a case study of a lot of companies. This idea of self-destruct and reinvent. How often do you see that? Is this like everyone knows that it's a right thing to do, and people have seen that if you don't change Kodak and so on, there's plenty of examples to learn from history. Yet it's very hard for industry leaders to completely reinvent themselves.
It's very hard. I think you need a culture of entrepreneurship. You need to be willing to have a loose grip on what your existing business was. And most companies are not able to do it. I mean, I think that's why, Fortune 500 turns over so much, on a sort of 10, 20, 30-year horizon as well. I think that's going to happen here too. But the thing about companies in India is, the unique thing about this market is the leaders of the larger companies are very entrepreneurial. And that's why they are able to get into new markets and continue to gain share. So I know the folks that have built the large IT services business here are actively thinking about how do we transform themselves. That does not mean they're going to capture all the market in the new paradigm. I do think some new ones will emerge as well. But one thing I really admire about the Indian business ecosystem is that the biggest companies are just as entrepreneurial as the small ones. This also makes it hard for somebody like us to come in and say, how do you really help build next generation category defining companies? And the answer is, it can't be just pure traditional venture capital. Yet another reason why I feel like even in India, you want to see the offering for the founders to be changing to build next generation companies from traditional VC.
Right. And is there a lesson for Indian entrepreneurs from something you said earlier? You said you are acquiring a healthcare system in US for Hippocratic. You guys are working with a lot of existing healthcare systems. Even Crescendo acquired a large call center.
Yes.
Is there a pattern there that the new age of companies not always about I'm an upstart, I'm going to disrupt an industry, but really figure out a way to either through acquisition or partnership, like really co-building with somebody who has access, perhaps customer trust, a lot of data, and you may have that AI talent and different way of thinking. Are we likely to see more of that?
Yeah, look, so AI is not a distribution advantage, it's a transformation advantage, right? So the way to capture the most economic value there is to not necessarily just be organic in the way you develop yourself. we call these venture buyouts. You want to go acquire businesses. We have a company called Commure, which is building a software operating system for all these health systems. And they're the ones who just rolled out the AI scribe tools at HCA and Tenet, two of the largest health systems.
Yeah.
And along the way, they thought they were missing some capabilities. They went and bought a public company called Augmetics. Why? Because it accelerates getting the product to be more complete, getting access to customers, and then transforming them with AI. Yeah. I think that playbook is going to manifest itself more and more in different areas. And we literally made a grid last year, which was, what are the industries and what are the business departments? And our strategy was, we will do some sort of a special situation. We do have a fund called Creation Fund opportunity in each of those areas. So Hippocratic is an example of that. Crescendo is an example of that. The venture buyout into Commure is an example of that. We're doing that in legal and revenue operations, marketing operations. So all of that, to me, there's a category of new businesses to be built in each of these areas. These are massive markets.
Right. Got it. No, I think that's something to note. Indian entrepreneurs should be probably more proactive in reaching out to existing business and finding those different dimensions to possibly collaborate. Hemant, I also want to ask you about the nature of risk. As a venture business is about risk, and when you're taking big, massive bets, especially when technology is changing so quickly, what are some of your mental models that you go back to? How do you think about just processing risk and taking these bets about the future? Because as you said, you're a very highly performance-driven culture. No matter how big a risk you are taking, somewhere you have to believe the risk-reward equation will play out. But it's not a simple equation that you can put in. You need to have some way of modeling that risk, and then your convictions also that you are using to back. So just how do you think about risk for other people to get some glimpse into your way of thinking about this?
So I have a huge appetite for risk, and I just believe that the highest reward comes with the highest risk.
Yeah.
And so you want to be smart about how you take risk, and you want to be very smart about who are the people you're taking that risk with. But I think there's a lot of incrementality where you can build a nice investment business, but you'll never change the course of history, and that's highly uninspiring to me, and we'll never do that.
Yeah.
So for us, it really is, believe in the theory of change, and then play the long game.
Yeah.
One of our core values is that, we always want to think about what the world can look like on a long-term basis.
Yeah.
But then have deep intensity in which we make short-term progress. So it's sort of like, intensity and patience as two sides of the same coin.
Right.
It's sort of having that kind of a mindset and being comfortable saying we have a theory of change of what the world should look like. We're going to work really hard to try to get there and take the risk. I think it doesn't always pay off, but nothing ever almost always pays off in venture. Our hit rates in venture are very low to begin with. So if you're not going to make the most of when you're succeeding and work on the right problems, then I think you'll suboptimize. It's actually my biggest worry in life is working on the wrong problems. Because I feel like we know how to build companies, we know how to partner with entrepreneurs, we have a lot of capital and market access available. But if you pick the wrong problems that are small, you're going to look back and say we succeeded, but it didn't really matter. And I think the greater risks that you take, greater propensity to work on larger problems.
Right.
And so it creates a culture that's very much about driving large societal systems change.
I'm taking mental note as I'm hearing you speak about this not falling for incrementality or working on wrong problems. It takes same amount of effort, but the size of outcome may be 100x difference depending on which problem you
Absolutely.
pick. My last question to you, Hemant, is I'm sure a lot of listeners watching this podcast will have a question about how do I get attention from GC? What does GC look for to consider my startup for investment? So what will your advice to entrepreneurs? What do you like to see in especially say early to mid-stage companies, which will convince you that it's worth a pretty serious conversation with the startup?
Look, we're open for business. I mean, email us and we will generally be pretty responsive quickly. So we want to hear from everybody. I think in terms of the kinds of things we do, I mean, it's so, we only do a few things a year. So a lot of the things we say no to, it's almost like it doesn't even matter that it's not a proclamation that's not an interesting business because we said no. It might be that that's not where we're focused or maybe it's the wrong time to be engaging. But I think we want to see people sort of share the core change they're looking to make, the core insight that's driving them, and show what defines excellence in their business. I think those are interesting ways to screen early on and figure out where should we spend concentrated time. As I said, I read everything that's sent to me. I look for it. I may not respond always, but I'll send it to the right people in the team and see if it's resonant with anybody. And we appreciate everybody sharing their life's work with us.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people will reach out to him and say, India has no dearth of bold entrepreneurs who are dreaming of big things. But I want to just thank you for taking the time, as well as some of this. You really have a different vision for building a different kind of firm, like your commitment to India and being at the forefront of these some of the big technology revolutions that are kind of playing out. So I want to wish you all the best, as well as I want to just thank you for taking the time and speaking on this podcast.
Thank you, and thank you for having me.
At SparX, we aim to bring to you stories of exponential impact. We share in-depth analysis of what goes behind success stories. If you find our conversations interesting, you can join us by subscribing to our YouTube channel. You can also listen to SparX on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or any other audio platform of your choice. If you have any suggestions on who we should invite or what topics we need to cover, just let us know in the comments. We are always listening, looking for ways to improve, and keep getting better as we go along.